This week on Snark Squad Pod, we are joined by Sylvia and Deboki to talk about the Netflix movie Someone Great. Welcome back to Snark Squad Pod. I'm Nicole Sweeney.
My name is Marines, and this week we are joined by Sylvia and Deboki.
Hello, I'm Sylvia, and I am a co-host of Smooch Squad, which is a podcast about crushes.
Hi, I'm Deboki, and I have a YouTube channel called Okie Dokie Boki, where I talk about books and science.
We've asked Sylvia and Deboki to join us today to talk about Someone Great, a new Netflix rom-com starring Gina Rodriguez, and it's about a main character named Jenny who gets a job at Rolling Stone and she has to relocate for this job to San Francisco. So her boyfriend of 9 years ends up breaking up with her because he doesn't want to do the long distance thing. And in the wake of their breakup, she decides that she wants to have like a last hurrah with her friends in New York City. And they end up getting tickets for this music festival. But really, it's just like a lot of shenanigans and feelings as she processes this breakup, gets ready to move and turn 30.
So we are going to start where we always start. Did you like this thing?
No.
Deboki.
It wasn't even your turn.
I feel like my response is going to be so anticlimactic now. Sorry. No, it's all good. I mean, so I'm not at a no. I think I'm like, I feel like solidly like happy that I watched this movie. I thought like, it was a fun movie. It took me on like some emotional turns I wasn't expecting to feel so strongly about. So I enjoyed it overall.
Sylvia, do you want to add anything to that? No?
Yeah, so I watched this movie twice. I think the first time I watched it, I felt like that. I was like, oh, this is fine. And then I watched it again today because Nicole texted me yesterday saying, hello, want to come do this thing? And I was like, yeah, I've seen this movie already, but I should probably watch it again. And I was like, wow, I don't like this movie. So no, I did not like this movie.
Interesting.
Yeah, I only watched it the once and I thought it was super enjoyable. And I agree that it had some moments that were like, oh, too real. And I wasn't really expecting it. I guess rom-com is, I don't know if that's, it's a breakup movie.
Right.
So there isn't a happily ever after here, which I don't know if I knew that. So it took me on like some emotional things, but I think it did some good things, and I'm very excited to hear like your hot takes because I don't have any about this movie. So
I've upped it to 4 hot takes. I had 3.
Oh, wow. I am also excited to hear these hot takes because I enjoyed this. I watched it twice now, actually. Also, I watched it, once just like in general to prepare for this, and then while we were getting ready, I like had time, so it was kind of on in the background while I was getting ready to come record this. But I mostly enjoyed this. I feel like to this point about it being not really a rom-com and like not having a happy ending, not having a happily ever after. I think like it kind of did in that it was a sort of a twist on the rom-com in that the real like relationship that matters for Jenny in this movie is her relationship with her friends. And it ends on a note of like, they're still going to be okay and have their friendship or whatever after she moves. So I don't know. I was not expecting to feel all the feelings that this movie made me feel. And I generally enjoyed it. I feel like the thing that we usually do after, did you like this is go through all of the individual sort of pieces of the thing. But now that we've teased Sylvia's hot takes, I feel like we have to start there, right? Like I can't, like I don't even want to. I rather than starting with Jenny or whatever, I need to hear Sylvia's hot takes.
Okay, well now it's 5. Number 1, I want my 3 hours and 4 minutes back. Like, cool. Okay, hot take number 2. I definitely am a TV person. It's like what I'm realizing. Like I am a TV person and not a movie person. Number 3, if you want to watch an excellent Gina Rodriguez piece of content, watch all of freaking Jane the Virgin. Like it's incredible. I feel like my time was wasted because I love Gina Rodriguez so much, like so much. And I just felt like I did not enjoy her in this at all, even a little bit. but I think it's because of how much I love Jane the Virgin.
Wait. So I'm sorry. What did you not enjoy about? I feel like
I
feel like Gina Rodriguez was fantastic in this movie. I thought she was great.
I just didn't like it. I don't know what. Maybe it's because I'm like, where I really think I just have I had a lot of trouble in this particular instance. In a way that I didn't have trouble, because she was also in Annihilation, right? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, in a way that I didn't have trouble in Annihilation, like removing her from like the character of Jane. Like, and I know that's not fair. I get that. I'm not like, I get it. I know this is my own problem.
See, that's as somebody who also loves Jane the Virgin, I like, to me, part of the appeal of this is that it was really cool and exciting to get to see Gina do something different than what she is doing on Jane the Virgin. You know, like seeing her be a fundamentally different character in this way. I don't know. I appreciated that.
I don't know. And then I'm like, if you want to watch a show about, like, if you want to watch content of like 3 badass women, I would rather watch The Bold Type. Like, I'd rather watch like I'm sorry, I would.
Okay.
I just like, I didn't enjoy this. And I don't know if it's because I have like weird feelings about the very, very, I think the other piece that this stems from for me is the very, very casual like drug use and the very casual way in which drugs are used. And I get that that's like a part of life, but it is such a departure from my comfort.
I think that is a really interesting point. That is a big part of this movie. And I want to put a pin in that, and like, we'll circle back to it later, because that is definitely on my list of things to talk about. So yes.
Those are my hot takes. But I think ultimately the thing that nailed it, because I was like, this is a fine movie the first time I watched it. And then the second time I watched it, I just felt so cringy about that I think is what like tipped the scale to no for me.
Okay. Interesting. So mostly you just want to be watching a TV show.
I mostly want to be watching better television than this movie.
Okay. This is not the direction I expected the hot takes to go, but that's okay. I'm glad we like got that out there at the top. So all right, with Celia's hot takes in mind, I am curious how you guys all felt about Jenny and Gina Rodriguez's portrayal of her.
I think maybe this is my own personal bias coming in, but the scene that almost turned me off from her is when she was in, which were the friends, Blair, in her office, and she was just like, like they were basically crashing her like important work presentation, and the reason that took me out of the moment so much is because like part of her whole reason for being in this movie in some way is that she's making this huge career choice where she's moving across the country. So she's clearly like this very career driven person, and then she's just suddenly so like wrought with the emotion that she forgets that her friends are also career driven people, or at least Blair is. And I had this moment where I was like in that moment where I was just like, she just feels so selfish, but she's also going through this really hard, awful thing. So I get it, but it just like I had to treat it more like a joke than an actual serious thing. So that's something that kind of takes away from the writing, where you have to be like, I don't know if this is really the character or something that they're just kind of doing for the sake of the movie itself.
So I had two like minds about this. I felt in some ways that it was really interesting to see the dynamic between Jenny and her 2 friends, and portions of it were really feelsy for me because I have a group of like super multicultural friends, and I'm a Latina woman. So like seeing that represented and just being like, yeah, this dynamic and this group of people, even just like looking at it, like that looks like my life. So that, I mean, except for the casual drug use, but we'll get there. Just clearing that up. But, the fact that
put it out there.
This just in.
The fact that like I could see myself reflected in that was really, really neat. There were points where I was like, one of the things that I can't stand, that's too strong, but one of the things that always makes me groan is when you have a Latina or Latinx character and they like casually just say random words in Spanish, so you know that this is a Latinx character. Like, you know, she didn't say any ay Dios míos, but it was like close. But then again, I'm like, I know people like this. Like, I know. It felt so real. Like, I definitely have a friend or two that is exactly Jenny. So I don't know. I thought it was neat to have that character, and I felt for her. I think that probably looking at Jenny in this, like, you know, couple day span was not a true depiction of her as a person, because she was in the middle of like a grieving thing, and because this wasn't a typical day for her. So the ways that she felt, like when she was arguing with her friends and she was being selfish or annoying, like I at least understood that from the perspective of like, you know, she's going through it, and this is probably not her norm. So I like Jenny.
This is a thing that has now come up for us repeatedly in recent episodes too. This idea of like very selfish, you know, main characters doing things that are ostensibly very selfish. And I think it is very much to the point of like what you're saying, that the story is with her at a very particular, you know, like extreme moment in time. That's part of the point, right? Like the reason that there's a story here is that she's going through something. And so, you know, that's part of why you wind up getting her doing selfish things. You know, these are the things that propel the plot along. And like, so how much of that is, it makes sense that she's just suddenly super selfish? How much is she, you know, just always selfish? How much of this is like contrivance? I don't know. Like that is the kind of thing that I think will vary from story to story. But this does, it's interesting that this has now come up several times in the last few episodes.
Did you like Jenny?
I loved Jenny. I think I am maybe like related but different to Sylvia's feelings. Like I think like Gina Rodriguez is a huge factor for me in my experience of watching Jenny. And so for me, my Gina Rodriguez bias translated into like a strong Jenny bias, you know, just like from the jump. I immediately cared so much about her in this way that I don't know how much of that is the character, how much of that is the portrayal, unclear. But yes, I loved her. I also just really enjoyed all of the like small moments with her friends, like larger sort of story things, the shenanigans, the antics, the drugs, whatever. But like there were so many little moments between them that were really like sweet and earnest and heartfelt. And I loved all of that.
I really love that we also got to see the progression. I mean, sorry, again, I'm fixated on her career.
Yes.
I think it's like she's a music journalist, and like she's working as a journalist, and that's a really tough path to take. And I love that part of like the flashbacks that we're seeing is seeing her learning kind of how to create her own career, and how that's the backdrop of it, because I think it fleshes out her character so much to like kind of show her progress, to show what motivates her. And music in particular is such a big part of this movie, like all of the different montages that there are. I just loved how those things all connected together to like kind of create this world of Jenny.
I had seen on Twitter, somebody just tweeted onto my timeline, like the scene where she's dancing to Lizzo's Truth Hurts. And somebody was just like, oh, this hit home. And I watched the clip on Twitter before I saw the movie, and it just got me hyped to watch the movie, because watching her like dance around singing into some like wine or liquor or whatever with the song in the background, it felt like it was one of those moments that is like, I 100% have done that. Like,
right.
That has happened. Like, and you know, so there, like, to Nicole's point, like those moments of like interactions and the flashbacks we get too, where you see her growing up basically, and it is the progression of her relationship and her career. Like a lot of those moments felt real to me in a way that I could relate to, or that I've seen before, that I've lived before. That
dance scene was my favorite part of the whole movie. But I think it's because I love Liz.
Also, yes.
I suppose also because, particularly watching it today, precisely yesterday, I was sitting in a car with my best friend, and we were just sitting in the car. We blasted this specific song and just like screamed it out like into a closed car. And it was very magical and good. And so then when this played, I like had this like very visceral, like, I just did this exact moment yesterday. So that part, good. The rest, fine.
We mentioned the relationship and sort of like flashbacks and stuff, and I wasn't sure whether or not it made sense to like move to Nate or move to the friends first, but I think we'll start with Nate. His character is interesting because he's presented to us primarily through flashbacks. Like he's basically non-existent in the, main, like the central timeline of the movie. What did you guys think about the way in which the movie showed us their relationship?
Kind of reminded me of the last 5 years. So this idea of you're watching this love story at the same time, concurrently with heartbreak. But again, the last 5 years did it better. But it did remind me of that a little bit. So you can see just like and almost it had the same moment where like they both meet in the idea that they both meet each other at one point, which is her imagining him at the very, very end. That's like when we see them cross paths in like her real timeline, and I say cross paths in quotes. But
right.
That's kind of what it reminded me of while I was watching it.
I love the first. Again, with the music, it was like a little bit like on the nose, but I really love the montage with Supercut by Lorde, in part because like I love that album, but I also loved how they used the different like technology, like showing, because they've been in a relationship for 9 years. So like in the past 9 years, the way that we talk to each other online and the way that we show our lives has changed. And I loved how they had the different interfaces, the different like different messengers, like all of these different things to like track like time and the point in their relationship that they're at.
The Lorde supercut bit at the beginning I thought was really, really fantastic. It was just very impactful and like a good, quick way to, move all of that information along. And also really fitting that it was done with music in that way. In addition to conveying a lot of information about their relationship in a like really quick and impactful, moment, it also told us a lot about like the movie that lay ahead, beyond that moment, just because of how much music was an integral part of the movie itself. So I thought that was really cool.
I really liked that this managed to convince me that these two people were in love through everything that we saw. And like I saw it and I felt it, but it also in a story that is about Jenny prioritizing herself, didn't prioritize Nate as a character. Like this didn't feel at all like his story. And I have no strong feelings about him outside of his relationship with Jenny, which I think is a really neat and subtle thing to do. There are so many times, even, we were talking about Daisy Jones recently. We spent a chunk of time talking about Billy. And I guess that's an example where they kind of share billing or share time in that story. But a lot of times in rom-coms, you get a very strong, love interest presence. Here, he was just so in the background and just enough for us to understand what Jenny is going through. And I thought that was really neat. And a lot of her grief felt real to me. So that's like, I don't really have strong feelings about Nate. I have strong feelings about all of the ways that we saw Jenny's grief represented. And I thought they did a great job with that.
Since Nate is, as you said, mostly only important as the, reason that Jenny is going through some shit at this moment in time, let's move on to her friends, Erin and Blair.
I love Erin. She's also very good. I don't love Brittany Snow.
Yeah, I liked both of them in this. I thought, again, like seeing them and the ways that they were all different but complemented each other. Like I was like, this is me and my friends. Like, I don't know, something about like just their differences, their different like energy levels at any given moment, their support of each other. The scene where Erin and Blair are fighting, and then they're like yelling at each other, and then the next moment they're like, I just love you so much, and they hug it out. I'm like, oh, I feel that. Like that's friendship, is being able to be like, no, you're doing something wrong, but also I love you. Bring it in.
You need to grow the fuck up, but also I love you. And like, can we go to the farmer's market together?
I love it. Yes. I love that was like the way that they defined their progress as friends was the farmer's market. And like it translated over into when they were talking to Leah, like the farmer's market was still there. Like that fight cracked me up.
this felt like a good portrayal of female friendships to me. I thought that it did a good job. And I really loved the ways that they were concerned for each other. There's even that bit where like Blair's dating Matt and her biggest concern is, will Jenny be mad? And I don't know, that just felt real to me, that they had each other's interest at heart.
I think what I loved most about this movie is all of the sort of friendship dynamics and watching all of that stuff play out between Jenny, Aaron, and Blair. I think like it felt very much like I was, hanging out with my friends, like me and my fake TV friends, just having them in the background. I don't know. I think that is like the thing that this movie did particularly well. And I think like that's that experience of I'm, hanging out on the couch with my imaginary friends. I think that that's the very specific kind of emotional note that this is like most designed to hit. And I think that it did that effectively.
There's this line in the movie and that stressed me out a little bit between the three of them. So it's Erin is talking, I believe, to Leah, and she calls Jenny her best friend and says like, and also my friend Blair. And that, I don't know, that also stressed me out a lot because like there are these like the dynamics between trios of like best friends and how someone always ends up feeling left out. And I know that this movie didn't really portray or show that in any way, but there was that one line and I like, it also felt very gutting to me. And just because she was like, my best friend is moving away and also Blair this, but not like, and my other best friend, just like,
right.
And it, to me, but maybe this is, again, my own personal, I have always felt like the third wheel in trio type friendships. So I am attuned to like hearing when someone says that, they mean that this person is secondary, not necessarily just like it's cumbersome to say, and my other best friend. But that stressed me out also.
I mean, it's interesting because Jenny is sort of the friend who is actually kind of left out. Like she doesn't live with them. And a lot of her story, like especially the second half of the movie, those two are together and she's kind of off on her own, like her self-discovery is on her own. Whereas they're still going to be in New York together. They're like yelling at each other about growing up, whereas, she's like, now I've left you guys, I've left Matt with this message, you guys will figure it out later. And then they like reconnect, but she is distant from them. So I found that trio thing interesting too, because like any odd number friendship group always seems like it's going to have that one person who's at risk. And Jenny also is moving to the other side of the country. So they have this like really nice uplifting end, but there's sort of this feeling of like, but like, will they be friends? Like,
I hope so.
Especially like, how are they going to FaceTime on the toilet if there's a 3-hour difference? Like, have they thought this through?
Another part of like the friendship that I thought like hit me unexpectedly in the feels. So in addition to this being about like a breakup and a relocation and a friend thing, it is also about growing up, which we talked a little bit about the farmer's market kind of representing like changes in your life and growing up or whatnot. And I specifically like remember, it's one of those things that nobody tells you about like growing up and being in your like later 20s and early 30s is that everybody does this like growing up at a different pace. And there's this weird time where you are, you have friends that are still going out like they're in college. You have friends that are married with children, and they're friends that are like exactly in the middle that are like single, but not partying that hard anymore because we're almost 30. What are you doing? And so the pace at which everybody kind of leaves and enters those different stages at this time of life is really interesting, and it really like messes with dynamics. So I think that was interesting that, we have this trio of friends, but it's like, this is the time that things are changing, right? That you have Erin who can't even wake up for the farmer's market. And then you have Jenny moving across the country for her dream job. And if you can make it out of that stage with like the people who are close and your friends, like that's the true test of friendship. So I was watching this and like thinking about my own best friend and like the difference of like, going out every weekend when we were in our early 20s to now where we are literally going to an old lady matinee next weekend to watch a movie. It's like 2:00 in the afternoon. We're going to go watch a movie. So,
and it's planned a week in advance.
Yeah. Yes.
A matinee that you clearly don't need a ticket for ahead of time.
Things change. And this movie did a really good job of capturing that.
Yeah, this movie actually made me think a little bit about New York specifically, because I think there's something about that the dynamic of these friends that feels like very specific to living in these large cities, where you are a little bit like it's easy to feel kind of isolated even while you're surrounded by so many people. Like I was in New York for a few months, and I was living with one of my friends from high school, and she had been there a little bit longer, and she had been talking about how isolating it's been to live in the city for a longer period of time. Like over time, you're just like trying to find things kind of to do with people, but it's so hard because getting around is weirdly inconvenient. And so that's something I found interesting about this movie in particular, just because it is so much about that friendship, where I am sort of impressed that they've been out of college and they've still maintained such a tight group. But it also seems like that's sort of necessary, and that's part of living in the city.
This movie did a really great job of utilizing New York as a place. A lot of Jenny's memories are rooted in place. I think, so the other way that this got me super in the feels is that I am like always enthralled by things that are about grief and the different way that people grieve. And so this story is a lot about grief, and some things that really caught me is, you know, when you're grieving, the way that you're trying to like live your life and move on, and then snap, something happens, you see something and it triggers the grief. And this is what happens to her is like a song plays, or she rides by
in the middle of the bodega.
Oh yeah. And so it triggers these memories. And, you know, we all have those things, right? You broke up with somebody in the song that used to be your song. Someone once complimented me when I had purple eyeshadow, and after we broke up, I couldn't wear purple eyeshadow. Like the stupidest things that just trigger the grief. Mm-hmm. And by using the flashbacks in those ways and like tying memories specifically to places, I thought it did a really great job capturing the grief, but also using setting and talking about how you tie people to places.
Yeah, we mentioned the Lord montage, but there was another really lovely little, like, shorter montage of when she's going from the show to the after party, and she's sitting in the car, and she's like driving down the street, and there's like a bunch of little like quick sort of flashbacky snippets of her and Nate's relationship, like really lovely moments, and then, you know, sort of building towards the last one is like a kind of, you know, clearly they had just had a fight or something like that, but again, making really interesting use of place and these memories being deeply attached to this place. And I think that's really interesting too, in the context of like, not only she's her breakup is happening because she's leaving, but like also, you know, now that she's broken up, like she is leaving this place. And so this whole idea of her having this one last, you know, big epic night in New York before she leaves New York, and all of the like really complicated things that are wrapped up in that, you know, the goal here is to have this really big epic night with her friends as her last night in New York. But also, you know, like this relationship, her 9-year-long relationship is also very, you know, attached to this place. So that's also part of what she's leaving behind. Like she's not just leaving behind, you know, her friend, she's also leaving behind a lot of like really painful and complicated and fraught memories too. Speaking of the Lord montage again, one of the other things that I really loved about this movie is how well it used music. I feel like the idea of Jenny as a music writer and like their whole sort of social circle as being as into, you know, music as they are, it's something that you could really easily go too far with, you know, and like have the characters be sort of caricatures. But I feel like they integrated all of that really beautifully. Like it felt natural, you know, there was never any sort of hand wringing as they were like thinking about their feelings about music or whatever. But it's just like they had a lot of very natural conversations about, you know, the lead singer of the Postal Service and whatever, you know, like these felt like true and real things. And then also in conjunction with that, the movie used music very effectively too, throughout. And I thought that was really cool and interesting, and also contributed a lot to the like ambiance that I loved about this.
I have a soft spot for like rom-coms with leads that are journalists, which is something that is oddly like
it's a whole trope.
It happens all the time, like magazine writer, or journalist, or columnist, or whatever.
Because it sets us up for her to have her big monologue at the end of the movie.
Right. I was just gonna say, you do definitely get the monologue at the end of the movie, but also this did a lot less of like her writing her feelings, or just the voiceover. Or I think it did a good job, just like that was her job. And we do get like those musical aspects kind of throughout, and they're going to this big music event and all of that, but it didn't feel as like hokey as like the voiceover and her writing at her computer or something like that. So
Carrie Bradshaw,
so she's like scribbling on the subway, which is like actually pretty impressive, like the fact that she could write legibly while the train is moving.
We're not really seeing what she's writing, right? Like, so she's completely high, so who knows?
It's like the next morning she wakes up, she's like, I know I wrote something brilliant, but I have no idea what this means.
It's just like a picture of a dog.
All right, so there's our segue into the drug use, which I said I would put a pin in and would return to later. I feel like this is as good a time as any. There's like a lot of drug use in this movie, like constantly. So I know you guys all have already indicated that you had some feelings about that. So how was that? How did that affect your experience of this movie?
So I went to a wedding last night, and so I was like slightly hungover when I was watching this movie today. And I just remember watching, just being like very impressed with the amount like that they were able to drink. Because like we're similar ages, and I have definitely gotten to the point where like 2 glasses of wine and I'm like, wow, like I am amazing right now. But they're just like drinking bottles and bottles and bottles and still going. I was like, my hangover is getting worse watching this.
And then like napping for an hour and then getting up and going again. Like how
to rally.
The one and only like pre-recording thing that I sent Nicole was, there's a lot of casual drug use in this ? I don't know that I was expecting it. I don't know if I'm ever expecting that. But I also know that like I'm probably with like you, Sylvia, in that like I'm a kind of a prude about that, in a way that I'm always like clutching my pearls, like, oh my gosh, did she just say Molly? So I know that's a me thing, but also I don't know. I think that it was like the movie didn't make a big deal about it. I was making a deal about it. Like the movie was just like, whatever. It's like their last hurrah. We don't know how much they drink and party, on a regular basis, except for maybe we know that Aaron still goes out on weeknights or whatever. That's the only kind of thing that the show told us.
I mean, they seem pretty close to their dealer, RuPaul.
Yeah. Yes.
I have a question about that. Do they live in a world where RuPaul's Drag Race doesn't exist?
Oh, what's this universe that they live in?
That's really why she's so sad.
This is Endgame, but
yeah. She's in like some sort of multiverse timeline where like RuPaul's Drag Race was recently like removed from their world.
Sorry, that's getting away.
That's total tangent. Yeah.
Yes.
RuPaul did say like, haven't seen you in a while, which I don't know. Maybe they can't afford him. I don't know if they're getting their drugs elsewhere. The point is that I just think that the movie was casual about the drug use.
Yes.
Yeah, I think like the weed doesn't bother me even like a tiny, tiny, tiny bit. It was more just like the implied use or regular and casual repeated use of hard drugs that struck a chord with me. And I know that that's really, really personal because like I've lost family to addiction. And so like that is just tricky for me to navigate. And I didn't realize how much it bugged me, I think, until the second time I watched it. And I was like, there is something here that is really, really bothering me. And I know that comes from like a personal place. I don't think the movie was like trying to jab a thing, right? Or like throw it in your face.
Sure.
For me, it was just like, it's really, really hard for me to watch people make like decisions and for me to see that happen and also know the way in which they have these like very real consequences.
Oh, absolutely. And I think everything you're saying is particularly fair, both in terms of, like this is an important thing to note about this movie. Like, I don't know, I think like that's a valid like trigger warning on this movie is there's a lot of drug use, a lot of really casual drug use in this movie. And I think that even independent of the conversation about whether or not that is a, good or bad thing for this movie to have done, I think it's also very much the case that these super personal relationships that we have with the ideas that are present in stories will affect our relationship with those stories. Like that's an unavoidable truth that, if there is something that is a sensitive spot for you, that then like that's going to affect your relationship with the story. And that's not on you. Maybe it's not on the story. I don't know. But like it is either way. It is a fact of your experience with the thing.
Yeah. Because like hearing you guys talk about this movie, I'm like, wow, we watched 2 different movies.
Right.
Because like I'm hearing you guys talk about it, I'm like, I want to watch that movie, but I did twice. And I just didn't connect with it in the same way,
Absolutely. I think for me, I have definitely gotten to a place where I feel very desensitized to heavy drug use in media. But it is also a thing that I just acknowledge that like that will be the disconnect. Like Mari said earlier, this is just like my friends, except with 100% more drug use. That's just sort of a baseline understanding that I have about like a thing that will happen often when I'm watching media. I'm of two minds about this because on the one hand, I do kind of get everything that you're saying, Sylvia, in a way that is bigger picture than just the personal relationship that you have with it. Like I also think that like there's something there in that maybe we're crossing a line and I feel a little bit uncomfortable about it. The flip side of that though is that this like girls' night out sort of movie trope. I feel like we've seen a number of iterations of stuff like this that feels like a Seth Rogen movie where they just cast women instead of men, and it ends up feeling very sort of stilted and unnatural. This isn't quite the same thing, but I saw, oh God, I forgot what it's. Oh, Long Shot last weekend. It's very bad. It's exactly what you expected it to be from the trailers, and like everything about Charlize Theron's character was just like, it's like basically you wrote a bunch of Seth Rogen lines and then you cast her like to do this, and it felt very unnatural. And the thing that I appreciated about this movie is that for all of my feelings about the drug use aside, it still did feel like natural and true. It felt like I bought that these were the choices that these women were making, and not like this wasn't just a movie written for a bunch of dudes and then you like gender swap it.
Yeah, it wasn't unrealistic.
Which, is not nothing. Mm-hmm. We mentioned RuPaul. There were a lot of cameos in this movie, like a lot of like interesting little cameos. The RuPaul one was great. The Rosario Dawson as her cousin, or as Nate's cousin, also very, very charming. I think the best one of all, though, was the like opening scene. And I was sad that the opening scene was so short. I like that could have gone on for, another 15 minutes and I would have been perfectly happy. Like let that be a whole episode of a TV show and I would have enjoyed myself thoroughly.
Yeah, I think I was just listening. I'd listened to the episode of Keep It where they interviewed the writer / director, Jen Caton Robinson. And I'd listened to it like a few weeks ago and was like, oh, okay, this movie sounds interesting. And I listened to it again after watching it. And I think she mentioned that scene, they originally had it written one way where she was just going to be like, I don't care about you, don't talk to me. But then they just like kind of let her like go with like, actually, why don't you pretend that you're kind of interested for a little while? And then all of a sudden you're like, no. And she just like improv that. And I was like, it was perfect.
Yeah, that worked out very beautifully.
I was like really impressed in the second half how easily they got me to go back and forth between like cracking up and crying. Like
Yes.
They had that like hysterical farmer's market fight, and then they went back to Jenny and like her and Nate, and like that's when you're starting she's starting to put together the pieces, which means that we're starting to put together the pieces of why they really should be broken up. Like it isn't just the idea of her moving across the country, it's that they're at a point in our lives where they're growing apart, and that realization and the way that those conversations are like put together, I was just like sitting there just like crying, and then 5 seconds later I would be cracking up because of some ridiculous thing that Aaron and Blair were doing.
And it's fantastic too because of the way that it plays into the themes that Mari was talking about earlier in terms of, you know, getting into your late 20s, early 30s, and everybody being at very different milestone moments. And like that is also part of what's going on in this breakup. You know, like that's one of the reasons that it's more than just the move. They managed to convey that without making the movie about Nate. Like, you know, like they show us that through Aaron and Blair, and then like all you need is, you know, one more like little montage, you know, moment with Jenny and Nate for the audience to kind of make those connections themselves. And that's also really like cool.
I liked that they took us through that and her relationship in that order or in that way, where all they showed us at the beginning was the good stuff. So we really felt rooted in Jenny's grief. And then you saw like the cracks in it starting, and you know, they showed us a fight, and then you really started to see that it wasn't just about the move, that it was like all of these different pieces that, and I think that, you know, we have that realization right along Jenny, because she's, you know, so immediately in her grief that she needs to come to a place and like see the full picture for herself as well. And it was a neat thing to do to keep us like moving along in the story, right? And like understanding a little more as we kept watching.
Yes.
Another moment that I really loved was towards the end also, Aaron and Leah's conversation, when Aaron is finally confessing her feelings to Leah. I mean, it was already funny because Blair's in the background, like just like out of her mind, but like
What?
Yes.
Feeling the seasons change.
But also like the way that conversation was framed was, I think, really interesting in the context of this movie, because so much of this movie is about how these friends are here for each other. But I felt like the way that Aaron and Leah shared their experience as queer women with each other, and the way that Leah was like, well, this is a thing your friends don't understand. I thought that was a really interesting moment in this movie, because it's like these friends are everything to her. And Blair has had this moment where she's like told Aaron, you have to grow up. And that's important to Aaron. But Leah is also pointing out, like, you know, there is a limitation like there where Blair is doing this thing that she's like, you know, she cares about you, but you have not had this conversation with her, and you could, but she wouldn't understand it.
I really, you know, to kind of go back, and Sylvia, you were talking about like dynamics between friends and especially trios and how that can be kind of unequal. I think one of the things, I had a trio of friends in my early 20s. I'm only still friends with one of them. Spoiler alert. One of the, well, here's the lesson. Here's the moral of the story. One of the things that I kind of had to learn in my own like growing up is the way that people can fit into your life, and even best friends can be best for different reasons, and not everybody can be there for everything for you. And I think that's like one of the big messages of the movie is that at the end of the day, Jenny and Nate really love each other, but they cannot be who each other needs at that moment. And so the best thing that they can do for themselves is to move on and to pursue what they need to pursue. And it's the same with friendships, and that kind of idea that, like, you know, Aaron and Blair live together, but probably Jenny and Aaron share things that, you know, Jenny and Blair don't, and all of the different ways that they can connect on different ways doesn't make any of the other friendships less. It just means that people are different things for you. So the fact that, you know, Aaron has these two best friends, but neither of them understand what it is for her to be a queer woman, and for the story to acknowledge that not everybody can be everything for you. I thought that was really neat. And it doesn't at all lessen what those three women have together. And it actually strengthens what she has now with her girlfriend.
I also think it's really impressive how well this movie that is kind of, you know, like it's a like fluffy Netflix rom-com, whatever, but it is ultimately about like the idea that relationships are complicated. Friendships, romantic relationships, just like all of it is complicated. And I I don't know. I love that the ending was as open-ended as it was, you know, like I like that it's the sort of the point is, you know, there aren't really like clear-cut easy answers. You just, you know, you make choices and then, and that's, you live with those choices basically. And I don't know. I think that the way that it explored all of those different relationships in such a short space of time was really lovely. Thank you to Deboki and Sylvia for joining us to talk about Someone Great. If you are enjoying this podcast, we would love and appreciate it if you joined our community on Patreon, where we've got some bonus content and polls to vote on future podcast media. You can find out more at patreon.com/SnarkSquad. We would love to hear all of your thoughts on Someone Great. You can find a post dedicated to this episode as well as any show notes at SnarkSquad.com, or you can find us on Twitter at Snark_squad. I am at Sweeney Says.
I'm at My Name is Marines.
I am at Sylvia717.
I'm at okidoki_boki.
Thank you, as always, to Stephen Chin for the theme music that is playing us out right now, and we will be back in your podcast feed again next week. Bye!
Bye.